What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I thought a pretty cool topic would be like the powers of Copycat from Deadpool 2. I thought it'd be like a pretty cool topic. So here's the deal. Which, by the way, tomorrow's video, for those of you guys who are interested, tomorrow's video is the Bat Family Civil War from DC Rebirth. And then we'll probably do apparently it's Full Story Fridays, because that's what it is now. So we'll just do like the Death and Return of Batman. I don't know. Anyway, so Copycat. All right, here's the funny thing. Bringing Copycat in, because Vanessa Carlyle, she was the girlfriend of Deadpool in the first movie, for those of you guys who don't know who she is. Bringing her in to Deadpool 2 is kind of intriguing, and I'm actually pretty interested to see what they do, because Vanessa Carlyle, she made her first appearance back in New Mutants issue number 98. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. Vanessa Carlyle's intriguing. Like, her powers are actually, I think, one of the coolest power sets in Marvel Comics. And here's the reason why. In Marvel, you have like a wide array of different powers, right? But like, to me, no set of powers is more interesting than people who can shapeshift and become other people. Now, the most popular shapeshifter in Marvel, by virtue of the movies, I would say, is Mystique. She's really the one that gets like the most prominence. There's other shapeshifters around there too, but Mystique is the one that gets like the most, screen time, the most face time, because, she was played by like Rebecca Romijn, and she was played by Jennifer Lawrence, and she really is like one of the more popular characters out there. But Mystique's ability to shapeshift is surface, meaning that she can copy the appearance of a person, and that's it. That's all she can do. She can't shapeshift into Nightcrawler and then teleport around. Her powers don't work that way. It's really more of just a surface ability. It's just the restructuring of her physical form. With Copycat, it's not that way. So Copycat has the ability to shapeshift into people and then copy their powers. And the reason why is it goes all the way down to like the cellular level, is the explanation Marvel gives. But remember, when it comes to like mutants, and when it comes to any being that has a superpower, it's all based on their genes, right? Like, that goes all the way back to Jack Kirby. His whole what was it that he wrote that in? I keep wanting to say, I think it was Eternals. I keep wanting to say it was Eternals. But he wrote that whole thing where the Celestials showed up in the early days of man, and they messed with the genes of people, and you had the Deviants, and you had the Eternals, and then you had baseline humans whose genes were modified so that in some 10,000 years that basically like the genes would start to kick in, and slowly but steadily you'd start getting people with superpowers, which is where we got Selene from like 10,000 years ago. We got Apocalypse, we got Gideon, we got God, who else did we get? Well, Kane the Conqueror was a time traveler, so he doesn't really count. But you got like the various externals that existed out there, and then you started getting into like the age of heroes. So like in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, you started seeing like this huge expansion of the mutant population, hence the formation of the original X-Men. But like that's the whole basis behind like how people get superpowers, and so it's all gene based. For people like Bruce Banner, it's a genetic structure. His genes were irrevocably modified when he was hit with the gamma bomb. For Steve Rogers, it's a modification of his genes by virtue of the super soldier serum and the various radioactive waves that he was exposed to. For Peter Parker, it's his genes. He was bitten by a radioactive spider. That's part of his genetic structure now. It's always the same way across the board. With mutants, it's just the activation of an X gene. Somewhere along the line, that X gene just kicks off. Usually that happens under one of two circumstances. It's usually just puberty, or it's duress. Sometimes you have mutants born with just like an insane amount of power, right? Like, you had Hope Summers. She was the first mutant born after the events of House of M, when the Scarlet Witch stripped 98% of the mutant population of their powers. But she was born, like, and immediately her powers kicked off. And it was like, holy cow. Like, dude, this chick is insanely powerful. Like, she's, like, the most powerful force that, Cerebro had picked up at the time, which Marvel does that a lot. Like, I mean, that happened with Hope Summers. That happened with, like, the arrival of Strife. That happened with Strife is awesome. That happened with, like, with Matthew Malloy. I mean, it happens with all those different things. All the time, depending on how big of a deal Marvel wants to make whatever mutant they're introducing. And so with Vanessa, when she, again, copies someone, she copies them down to the DNA line, like down to the genes, which means that like she basically copies their powers. And so because of that, like the other thing is when she copies people, because she's copying their DNA, for someone like Wolverine, he can't really tell the difference. Like, Wolverine picks up a difference by scent, right? Like, that's how they usually have like Wolverine discover that like Mystique's been impersonating someone this whole time, because Wolverine's just like the nose, you know, but like with Vanessa Carlyle, he can't differentiate those things. His sense of smell is not keen enough to be able to pick up the minute differentiations between like Copycat's DNA and the person that she's copying, because there still are strands of herself there. That's how she doesn't lose herself whenever she copies someone. Well, at least she did up until XFactor, or I'm sorry, up until Weapon, when she joined Weapon X. And she tried. It's this weird story. It's this weird story. She eventually leaves. Like, we'll talk about like her first appearance here in a second. But like, she eventually goes off and does her own thing, and then she ends up in XFactor. I'm sorry, in Weapon X. And then she tries to bring Deadpool in, and Deadpool won't join. There's another guy at the same time that's part of Weapon X named Kane, which if you don't know who he is, it doesn't matter. But like you have Kane and you have Vanessa Carlyle. Vanessa Carlyle, because of the fact that Weapon X had like modified her power so she could like pick up even more steam when she was cloning people, she eventually started to lose her mind or her memory or something like that. I don't know, 1990s comics. And so like she ends up going after Deadpool, but then I think like she falls in love with him. And so then Weapon X sends Kane, and then Deadpool defeats Kane, but then Vanessa Carlyle is killed. And that's like, I want to say it's like XFactor 58 or 59 or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been forever since I read the old Rob Liefeld XFactor comics. Just keep in mind, guys, I don't know everything about everything. So it is kind of cool. Now, here's the deal. So when Vanessa Carlyle first showed up, you initially didn't really know what she was about, right? Like, one thing to bear in mind, I want to do a little bit of an explanation here for those of you guys who were new. In Marvel Comics, you have like a wide array of different X-Universe teams. When I say X-Universe, I mean things that revolve in some form or fashion around the X-Men. So you've had a whole bunch of different teams. You had like the original X-Men by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. You had Uncanny X-Men, which is like Wolverine and Storm and Colossus and all those guys. You had X-Factor, which was the original Stan Lee, Jack Kirby X-Men forming their own team. You have X-Force. You have a lot of different X-Men teams that are there. Back with the Uncanny X-Men era, when Chris Claremont was writing it, you had an editor-in-chief at the time named Jim Shooter. And Jim Shooter said, I want a new X-Men team. If you guys don't do this, then I will find someone else who will. And because they were the two like top X-Men, X-Universe writers at the time, they basically banded together and they formed New Mutants, I'm pretty sure it was. And New Mutants was launched by Chris Claremont, picked up by Louise Simonson, and she wrote it for like the first 85 issues or something like that. Eventually, with issue number 86, she left. I think like Bob Harris, the editor-in-chief at the time, kind of like forced her out more or less. And then Rob Liefeld, the creator of Deadpool, came on board. So Rob Liefeld writes from issues 86 up to issue number 100. And when Rob Liefeld took over, instead of having the New Mutants as just kind of like a team that was free-floating, because they basically were. I mean, the New Mutants had some cool stories, like with Danny Moonstar and all those characters. Eventually, Xavier left Earth to go hang out with the Shi'ar Empire to be cured of some illness he had. Magneto took over as leader of the team. And then Xavier came back. Magneto went back to being a villain, and the New Mutants were just free floating for a couple of years. And so Rob Liefeld took it over and brought in Cable with like issue number 87, and said Cable's going to be the guy who like leads the X-Force or leads the New Mutants team. But the cool thing was that at the time, because of stories like The Dark Knight Returns from DC, comics were moving towards a direction of being like more hardcore and like super high action and all kinds of stuff, and like darker, grittier, edgy stories. And so Rob Liefeld started moving the New Mutants in a direction to where they became more militaristic. And I want to say like their first real evil team they faced off against was the Mutant Liberation Front. I think, the MLF. And I want to say it was led by Strife. Now, if you guys don't know who Strife is a demon. This guy's an absolute monster. So Strife is basically what Cable would be if he wasn't held back, right? Like, if you guys have seen the Deadpool trailer, you guys know that Cable has like a robotic arm and like he has an eye that glows. That's the techno-organic virus. It's a virus he was infected with as a baby by the villain Apocalypse to test and see whether or not Cable could be like a host for Apocalypse, like a new host body. And so because of that, Cable basically has to use his telepathy and telekinesis to keep that virus from literally eating him alive and then turning him into a machine and then eventually killing him. Strife doesn't have that problem. Strife is a cloned version of Cable from the future. And so Strife can just use his telepathy and telekinesis for whatever he wants to, and he is stupidly powerful. He shut off the powers of Jean Grey. I don't think she had the Phoenix Force at the time, but he shut off the powers of Jean Grey, which is no easy feat. That's like shutting off the mental abilities of Professor X. I want to say in Executioner Song, which is an amazing story, in Executioner Song, he went against a full contingent of the X-Men, X-Force, and X-Factor all at the same time and won. I'm pretty sure that's the case. I'm not going to swear to it. I might be kind of, over glorifying it because I haven't read the story in years. But like it was a really cool set of events. He's uber powerful. But anyway, so like that was their first real big thing, and that was like Rob Liefeld basically saying, like, we're going to turn these guys into like a pretty hardcore team. Like we're going to turn them into like a pretty militaristic team, and it was huge. Oh, dude, it was huge. Like it was crazy because of the way that Rob Liefeld was writing New Mutants. By the time issue number 100 hit, which ended the New Mutants series, and then X-Force number 1 picked up the next month, it was a seamless transition. I mean, just because of the way he was writing it. The only thing that changed was the name. And so because of that, like X-Force number 1 is like the second highest selling comic of all time. Oh, it was a huge deal. Oh, it was a huge deal when it first came out. That story was massive. Eventually, it dropped off, I'm pretty sure, when Rob Liefeld left. But still, like, it was an amazing story. Like, back when it came out, like, it was an amazing line of comics. So yeah, like Vanessa Carlyle, getting back on topic, I have this really terrible habit of like diverting off topic. Hopefully I did it in a way where I give you guys a whole bunch of cool information. But in any event, so New Mutants number 98 hits, 2 issues before New Mutants ends, and X-Force number 1 picks up, and Vanessa Carlyle shows up. All right, now the whole idea here was that Vanessa Carlyle, like we didn't really know what the deal was. All we knew was that with Cable being so mysterious at the time, because you didn't really know anything about him when he first showed up, with Cable being so mysterious at the time, the idea was somewhere along the line, he fell in love with a girl named Domino. And she was like one that kind of helped him to do this, this whole superhero thing. And so because of that, Domino seemed to have gone missing, but then like you suddenly had Domino who was there. And so Cable was like, oh, okay, cool, I guess everything's fine. And so you end up finding out later on that's Copycat. And Copycat is working for a villain named Mr. Tolliver, who later on you figure out is actually the son of Cable from the future who went back in time to kill his dad. But like she's working for Mr. Tolliver, and she's basically tasked by Mr. Tolliver to go and to infiltrate Cable's team. Now you don't really get any backstory about Vanessa Carlyle when she first popped up. She's just there. And that's how comics were back then. Like back then, characters would just appear, and then you would get an origin story later on if they were interesting, which made sense. It wouldn't make any sense to like go through and craft this huge elaborate origin for a character if no one cared. And so because of that, she's part of New Mutants for a little while. And then I want to say that like Deadpool shows up. Deadpool shows up in the same comic because Vanessa Carlyle had gone off the reservation. When she had gone through and started infiltrating the team, she wasn't reporting back to Mr. Tolliver like she was supposed to. And so the result is that Deadpool figures out, like Deadpool's assigned by Mr. Tolliver to track down Vanessa Kyle and to remind her of her mission. And so she ends up being like, okay, eventually she reveals the truth to Cable and his team because she's, has grown really close to them and she's in love with Cable because, the guy's huge and like he puts The Rock to shame because he's so muscular. So I would probably fall in love with him too. But she ends up falling in love with Cable, and she basically like betrays Tolliver. So then Deadpool's sent in, and Deadpool comes back, and then he ends up facing off against the whole team. He fights Cable, which is kind of cool. And then from there, Deadpool just like appears sporadically. Eventually, Vanessa Carlyle's ousted. The real Domino shows up at the end of the story, and that's the end of that. But she's cool. For her character, like with Cable having telepathic and telekinetic abilities, albeit not on the same level as Strife, still like his powers are sufficient enough that he can read minds. And so if he goes through and he reads the mind of Vanessa Carlyle, and as far as he's aware, like she is basically Domino because she has all the same memories, she looks the same, like her genetic structure's the same. That's how deep her powers go. Like that's how significant her powers go. Now, in terms of how her powers are going to work in the movie, I have no clue. I'm assuming that like Weapon X will give them to her by some manner or some means, because I feel like it'd be kind of weird to have her listed as Copycat in Deadpool 2 instead of just Vanessa Carlyle in Deadpool 1. And so if they actually assign the codename Copycat, then in some form or fashion, she's going to be Copycat. Now, they could take like a simpler approach and they could just say, well, she's just a really good master of disguise. Maybe they do that. I kind of hope they don't. Like, I kind of hope she actually has a shape-shifting ability. But again, like it's cool. Like when it comes to characters like that, like they're not very well known. They're pretty small time. Like Vanessa Carlyle, she didn't appear in that many comics. I would say probably less than 200. And when you compare that to someone like Wolverine, who appeared in 12,000, it's night and day. And so like when you take someone like her, she's pretty unknown. No one really knows anything about her. She's pretty obscure, except for outside of certain circles, namely like hardcore comic book readers. But her powers are so unique and so powerful. Now, I don't think they've ever really tested like the upper limits, right? Like, I don't think she's like Protege. Protege was basically a character from an alternate universe who could copy the powers of anyone he saw, up to and including like the Living Tribunal. So he basically became like a multiversal threat overnight. Like it was crazy how powerful he was. She's not on that level, but like they've never had her face off against like Gladiator of the Shi'ar, one of many of Marvel's versions of Superman, and then like try to copy his powers. Like they've never really done that. Or like copy the powers of Franklin Richards, or like, you know, Mad Jim Jaspers, or someone like you know, Michael Korvac, whatever. Like she's never copied the powers of like an extreme reality warper, as far as I'm aware. But there's no reason to say she couldn't. If she copies their genes, there's no reason to say that she wouldn't be able to pull it off. So I think she's like one of those kind of sleeper characters. I'm curious to see what they do in comics after the movie comes out, depending on what happens in the movie, because Marvel Comics has a really big history of like just kind of capitalizing on like a movie, not really giving a whole lot of thought to the comic, just saying, here, write a comic about it, and then they you know, they crank it out, and usually it's not very good. But still, like, I mean, they'll probably end up, you know, bolstering it up. I have no clue. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And by the way, the camera that I'm using here is a Canon 1DX Mark II. A lot of you guys have asked that question. So anyway, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.